political ideology aside, a very savvy business guy, a guy that, of course, is on Shark Tank, and people bring in the inventions, their ideas for businesses, and he does a yay or nay, I believe, for some school. By the way, Ty Simpson's got the same deal on the table right now. $6.5 million by one of a Big Ten school or SEC.
Mark Cuban just said the quiet part out loud. The WNBA players are asking for millions that simply don't exist. In doing so, he exposed what many see as a core problem with their entire negotiation strategy. The league isn't hiding money. There is no secret pool of cash. And the difficult reality is that the players were warned repeatedly by people who understand how professional sports leagues actually survive financially. At the time, those warnings were largely ignored. And judging by the current breakdown in the CBA negotiations, it's still unclear whether those warnings are being taken seriously now. Let's first establish where things currently stand. The WNBA and the Players Association have been locked in negotiations over a new collective bargaining agreement, and tensions have been rising for months. The players are pushing for dramatically higher salaries and a stronger revenue-sharing model. They want a larger piece of the financial pie they believe they helped build. On the surface, that argument sounds completely reasonable. But this is where the situation becomes more complicated, and it's a part many voices in the players' corner prefer not to discuss openly. From the outside, the WNBA appears to be experiencing a financial boom. New expansion teams have been announced, broadcast deals have been signed, corporate partnerships are increasing, and record viewership numbers are being reported. Add in the surge of popularity around Caitlin Clark, with jerseys flying off shelves, and it creates the impression of a league overflowing with new money. Naturally, the players looked at that surge of attention and activity and said they deserved their share. The problem, however, is that much of what they were seeing wasn't sustained revenue. Instead, it was a collection of one-time financial events that created the appearance of a permanent economic shift. When salary demands are built on temporary financial spikes, the foundation becomes unstable. It's like building on sand. Mark Cuban recognized that problem immediately. So did David Sampson, the former president of the Miami Marlins, a man who has sat in ownership meetings, negotiated labor agreements, and understands the real mechanics behind sports finance. But the Players Association either didn't see the issue or chose not to prioritize it. Cuban didn't need to step into the WNBA conversation. He sold the Dallas Mavericks and is no longer an owner. Technically, he has nothing to gain by getting involved. Yet he still spoke up, and his message was precise. He stated clearly that the WNBA simply does not have the financial structure necessary to give players the kind of massive raises being demanded right now. Not because owners are being cruel, and not because there's some hidden vault of money they're protecting. The problem is that the revenue being cited isn't reliable, recurring income that shows up year after year. What makes Cuban's statement significant is his background. He isn't an anti-player commentator or a media personality chasing headlines. He spent decades owning an NBA franchise and understands the difference between a sports organization that genuinely has money and one that merely appears to have money. Those are two very different realities. Right now, the WNBA gives the impression of financial growth. But the long-term infrastructure that supports sustained growth hasn't yet reached the level required to support the salaries players are requesting. Cuban did propose a possible path forward. His plan wasn't perfect, and even he acknowledged flaws in the salary structure he suggested. But the central message behind his comments was something the players may need to hear from someone they respect. You are negotiating for money the league cannot yet guarantee it will consistently generate. David Sampson expanded on that argument even further. On his podcast, he explained the financial logic that makes these negotiations so complicated. According to Sampson, the Players Association has pointed to expansion fees, relocation payments, and one-time broadcast bonuses as evidence that the league is flush with cash. In their view, all that money proves the WNBA can afford a dramatic salary increase. Sampson's response was blunt. Those are one-time financial events. You cannot evaluate the long-term stability of a business using money that only arrives once. An expansion fee, for example, is paid when a new franchise joins a league. The league collects it, but a large portion immediately goes into building the infrastructure needed to support that new team, training facilities, staff, operations, and administrative costs. Once that money is spent, it doesn't return the following season. The same logic applies to relocation fees or signing bonuses tied to new television contracts. They appear impressive in financial headlines, but they are not recurring revenue streams. Player salaries, however, are recurring obligations. They must be paid every single year. If a salary structure is based on temporary income sources, the result is a slow-moving financial crisis. Sampson emphasized that the more the players insist on treating those one-time payments as permanent revenue, the harder it becomes for owners to accept the proposal. No ownership group will agree to recurring salary obligations based on money they know will not reappear in future seasons. The disagreement becomes clearer when looking at the numbers. The players enter negotiations asking for a salary cap around $9.5 million. The league reportedly counted with something closer to $5.65 million. That isn't a minor gap. It represents a fundamental disagreement about what the league can realistically sustain. So where does this end? Realistically, both sides will need to move. The players will likely have to acknowledge that $9.5 million was never a realistic final number. It was an opening position partly built on financial projections that may not hold up under close analysis. At the same time, the league may need to raise its offer because maintaining elite talent requires competitive compensation, that if negotiations remain rational, the final agreement will probably land somewhere between $6.5 million and $7 million, possibly slightly higher depending on adjustments to the revenue-sharing structure. For players, that still represents a meaningful increase from current salaries. But it may not deliver the transformative financial leap that some supporters have been promising on social media over the past year. That gap between expectations and reality is already beginning to surface. Nafisa Collier, president of the WNBA Players Association, recently gave an interview that revealed a subtle shift in tone. She acknowledged that eventually someone will have to fold. That's not the language of a negotiator who believes victory is guaranteed. It sounds more like someone beginning to confront the financial math behind the situation. She also said the players believe their demands are fair and that they need to remain united. Those statements are standard negotiation strategy. Every union uses similar language. But within that confidence was an implicit admission that compromise is inevitable. Time is another factor. The season is approaching, and deadlines change leverage. Threatening to withhold labor can apply pressure early in negotiations, but that leverage fades as a calendar forces decisions. Owners generally have the financial flexibility to wait longer than players who rely on their salaries and want to compete. There's another issue that complicates a player's financial argument: expansion. The WNBA has announced plans to add new franchises, and the Players Association has pointed to expansion fees as proof of the league's financial strength. But if those fees are used to justify permanent salary increases, the league would theoretically need continuous expansion just to maintain those obligations. That's not how major sports leagues operate. The NFL hasn't added a team in decades. The NBA often goes many years between expansions. You cannot structure a long-term labor agreement around the assumption that new franchises will constantly appear to generate new expansion fees. So what happens 4 years into a new CBA when no new teams are added? Where does the money come from to maintain those salary commitments? The owners know that question doesn't have a clean answer, which is why that particular revenue argument is unlikely to succeed. Most likely, the process will follow a familiar pattern. There will be more public statements, more social media debates, and a few dramatic moments designed to show strength in negotiations. But as the final deadline approaches, both sides will quietly return to the table and settle somewhere in that $6.50 to $7 million range. When that happens, both sides will declare victory. The players will say they fought hard and pushed salaries forward. The league will say it invested in athletes while protecting long-term financial stability. The final result will probably look very close to where the numbers were always headed. For players expecting a financial revolution, the outcome may feel underwhelming. Instead of a dramatic transformation, they may receive gradual progress. And the deeper structural question, the gap between what the league earns and what players believe they deserve, will remain unresolved. That issue will simply be pushed into the next round of CBA negotiations. In a few years, the same debate will likely begin again. Mark Cuban didn't introduce a new argument. Financial analysts and sports executives have been discussing these concerns privately for months. The difference is that Cuban said it publicly, attaching his name to the reality many insiders already understood. WNBA is growing. The talent level is rising. The product on the court has improved dramatically. None of that is in dispute. But growth in attention and popularity does not immediately translate into sustainable revenue. In professional sports, money has to exist before it can be distributed. That isn't an attack on players. It's simply the economic reality of every professional league in history. The players who recognize that reality may negotiate effectively. Those who don't may eventually sign an agreement that feels disappointing, even if the final numbers were always destined to land exactly where they did. The quiet part has now been said out loud. The real question is whether anyone involved is actually listening.